Yeah, so covert fifth columnary on the loose. As I was saying in the previous videos, there's a demonstration of a racket occurring involving fundamental duplicity in certain areas of human action, to include in the development of technologies, in the development of civil infrastructure, to include how people are fed, how their air is treated, and what's put into the water and how that's treated and so forth, their medicine. Technology has been suppressed and in favor of those who have hoarded it, and it has been weaponized and directed against those considered outsiders of this cult, which I call the cult of Nimrod. So it should be first emphasized that this fifth column activity has been going on since ancient times in some form or another. And while I refer to that set of elements that includes all the lower level dupes and their dupery and the charlatanry of the whole act and the chicanery behind it and the absurdities and ironies which stem from all this, and I label all that fifth manure, I speak derisively in the context of a system of power which has an ancient origin in generating certain asymmetries in the status of various elements of society in favor of those who have a certain sort of power. And while that has a history behind it that I'll have to go into, I first want to connect that to the issue which makes all of it so critically relevant to us at this time, and that is that there is a systemic knowledge asymmetry of the nature of the existence of certain entities involved, such as technological usurpation and weaponization against the public. I mean, for all I know right now, this actually is meant to try and gaslight me by presenting me with a fire alarm. And there might not even be a fire. It's just, hey, we're gonna harass you. You're causing neighborhoods to have to wake up. We're gonna blame it on you according to the social scoring, whatever system they have. Who even knows how it really works? But so, I mean, I don't see the fire. I don't smell the fire. I don't see the heart attack in the street. So I don't know what the fuck it's about. But it seems to be about, in some sense, this. What if it were? Who's to say it couldn't be? Who's to say that's not how they do it in Fifth City, right? So I'm just saying, if you don't know that it's going on, that's something. But you may not even know that it's going on or it could be going on. And it might not be going on. But what if it is? Then now, if you don't know, there's a knowledge asymmetry effect where every aspect of that could be detrimental to you and on purpose, for a certain purpose, could become done to you without your knowledge and permission, though it will be presented to you as if it were the natural order of things, which, so you're being made into a dupe and a victim and a sacrifice at the same time. If that shit's going on, curse them and they can go straight to hell. But for all I know, maybe someone actually is having a fire, or maybe there is an emergency somewhere. That does happen. So therefore, any fifth columnary which could be in place, involving itself in these sorts of perhaps cyber antics against certain people or whatever, based on whatever algorithm, that is itself a weaponization of good faith against itself, because now I got to keep on, just being a dupe and making excuses. Even no matter what they do, they could just kind of drive the damn thing, fire truck right here, and then start blaring it, and then come over here and ask me if I need help or something. And then when I say no, they could walk off and say, "Go fuck yourself." I don't know. I mean, I guess I'd have to be an extreme dupe to think that that's normal. But what if they just want to encroach on approaching that by various vectors? And most people are in line. Most people are going to obey the system and believe in its propaganda and so forth. So they don't really need to focus on them. And then they can set it up in various ways using psychotronics, and invisible but very relevant technological augmentation to all this control, which does exist, is distributed in dual purpose civil infrastructure and technology. So psychotronics is reality. It happens to be responsible for, or partly, or at least coexistent with, instant communications technology such as Wi-Fi and so cell phone towers and so on. Psychotronics is attached right onto that and dual purposed, and that's a significant instance of what's done in general, which I will get into soon. Social networking has always existed. Currency rackets have always existed, but the internet had not always existed. Now, the internet and its covert internet topologies, which I've already discussed, are very relevant to this situation. Psychotronics can augment any facet of its input, throughput, and output, just as it can the nervous systems of those involved. But all these end up accumulating their greatest power as weaponized cultural rackets, where reinforced illusions about what's beautiful, what's appropriate, what's cool, what's amazing, what's villainous, and so on, can all be accentuated by these other forms of coercion, leading to an overall ability to influence the culture and the mass mind and individuals in particular circumstances. By taking advantage of these reinforcements of illusions upon accessories and dupes, they distort the normal equilibria of improper or bad actions and their appropriate consequences. So basically they can weaponize anything: stupidity, laziness, aggression, cowardice, lust, whatever. They can weaponize any aspect of human motivation through the application of psychotronics, dual-purpose technology, and the ability to program through social networking. So they use honey traps, raven traps, various forms of initiation into fraud, and so on. It starts small, it gets bigger, whatever. Next thing you know, you're sacrificing children to the devil. I don't know the details. It must get horrific at the top. But being involved in a system like this on any level is pretty horrific. The currency racketeering through the Federal Reserve System and other constructions that allow money to be created arbitrarily for some groups far more than for others without due regard for appropriate credit. So turns certain people into the state financially, basically. And the internet, of course, with its covert internet topologies and its being de facto a weapon system as part of the infrastructure of the military, and therefore to be defended against intrusion, and therefore it can arbitrarily treat as intrusion elements of society that it dictates through some national security policy to be enemies of the state, whatever. So you have the Patriot Act getting rolled out, people getting treated secretly and covertly as persons of interest, possible suspects, and this and that and the other. It's just being quantified and rolled out without regard to proper evidence or procedure that would be involved. So that's going on, while at the same time these rackets are getting tighter and coercing people more and more through artificially created instabilities in their society, in their economy, and in their culture, and in their very mentalities through psychotronics is just one example. Any kind of market collapse is going to be contrived. Any kind of shortage will be contrived. Any type of rioting will be contrived by now compared to what it would have been 30, 40 years ago. It's a severe racket. So various forms of counterfeiting, laundering, embezzlement, insider trading, loan sharking, and extortion, and all that sort of thing goes into the high finance side of currency markets as well, and currency policy. So all that's involved as well. So we see a gross abuse of utility for purposes that run contrary to what should be done in a proper society, while they maintain holdover through these same rackets, social networking rackets, fifth columnary, psychotronics assisted, weaponized culture in their favor for their purposes, destruction of the family, destruction of the individual, co-option of supposed evidences of individuation and all that in the culture. I mean, what matters is being cool, man. So, as it were, all that is set up to create reinforced illusions and turn society basically into a set of people best described as accessories and dupes to a crime inflicted on them. And it becomes infinitized whenever these methodologies are used as a form of a force multiplier in psy-war against anybody that opposes this sort of thing, even if on principle, because it's outright evil. They don't care. They'll just define that as the enemy and attack it as if it were, foreign espionage agent or something. They're filthy. They're disgusting. They actually use an apparatus like this and abuse it for their racketeering purposes. It's just filthy. So they do develop networks based on analytic algorithms, usually social networking equations of information and association bonding. I mean, the psychology of these systems of analysis are very deep and very precise for small scale and large scale analysis of social behavior of human beings. They're usually expressed through equilibria equations that describe likelihoods of certain kinds of decision matrices that people will encounter and the way they'll respond. And the dossier on people is getting better and better for this system to model expectations of what people will do. They also have means of directly rewarding or punishing actions so that people play along with their schemes. Sometimes just with attaboy, sometimes with gift cards, sometimes with more important things like very fine cars or very nice items that you could rarely find in stores, but special made or special ordered, or have special associations with important people or whatever value they can arbitrarily create to make it fancier, to acquire the cooperation of people who have specific tastes or whatever. And then they can better entrust them with the responsibility of playing along, being figureheads for large sums of money they could never properly control anyway. They're just dupes sitting around acting like that's their billions. No, it ain't. That's weapon. That's ammunition for Psywar. You're just another stooge. You're a very high-class stooge, don't get me wrong, but you're still a stooge. And low class in nature because of being such. Well, these kinds of very aggressive manipulations of the social order directly treat it as how you would expect an intelligence framework of one nation to treat the population of another nation in an outright war. They would want to subvert that society's ability to function on a war footing and help bring the war to an end in their favor in that way. Well, they're doing that against anybody not initiated into their little cult of Nimrod. So that infinitizes all the crimes and all the events that take place by making them more intentional and more organized into a criminal act schemed over the entirety of society, a very organized criminal activity. So fifth columnary and all of its associated technologies that it now has are force multiplied to take direct action against those in the same system, but in ways that will favor them in ways that are highly distorted and not appropriate to what should take place in a world supposedly that has one spiritual essence. This is just one of the empirical verifications of the principle of ambivalence being truly cosmic in nature, because all the moral and metaphysical questions that could be rolled up into the idea of the essence of man are lived out inside this fishbowl bubble that we live in. The concept of justice being developed as something that should be expected and wanted so that everyone gets what they deserve and that it should be inevitable. That's a nice idea. But it's not nice for the fifth column because they're very unjust by their nature. And in fact, by nature, they are to be despised because of their basic villainy. And some of them have more of an instinctive love of conspiring crimes like this than others. And some have had more resources at their disposal, genetically and materially and situationally in history, so that they could create on a natural scale a culture of enslavement. But as artistic and scientific breakthroughs accelerated their capacity to do this, to create accessories and dupes, as well as perhaps enabling those who formerly were such to usurp their power. So there's been a development so that as this artistic and scientific development enhanced the methodological scale of power, so that accessories could be created and mass produced and their behavior predicted and controlled better and better. The culture of enslavement was strengthened, but it was destabilized in that those who happen to be the accessories and dupes may come to despise or wish to overthrow those who were on the natural scale at that time, but weakening, or in some ways being strengthened by technological advances, which they restrict to their own beneficial use and weaponize against everyone else, well, they're based. That's why we don't have a nitinol engine. We still have a combustion engine. They're going to have a sort of covert war against one another that Hegel did properly describe in his phenomenology of spirit as the first and the second consciousness. So this culture of enslavement will be strengthened, but in ways it will be destabilized. At the same time, on an implemental scale, where all the dupes operate, technology is sufficient to control them, or just basically certain techniques, highly reinforced with technology, is sufficient to control them. And the culture of enslavement has been built. Conspirators ruling over accessories, ruling over dupes, basically. And all of them taking advantage of the victimization of one another and those less culpable, whom they can assign arbitrarily in the status of enemy. So they can just arbitrarily put that into all their databases and just color code someone to get a certain blue beam treatment, Project Blue Beam. Establishes patterns of behavior through psychotronics and other advanced forms of information control technology, for example, covert internet topologies, which accelerates and amplifies certain types of influence for people in society and helps them get what they want advantageously, but in a way that's invisibly multiplied, even, I would say, to a nearly trans-exponential degree when needed. But that's also economized to control them, because there are those who are in charge of these wannabe gods. So basically the Nimrod, the cult of Nimrod at the top, more primitive and the root of power, through a Hegelian dialectic of control and the development of the history of those they control, as well as therefore controlling them through its being given a dual purpose existence, one for the controllers and one for the controlled. They developed a middle class, as it were, of hierophants, suzerains or suzerains, and sycophants. And this eventually evolved a kind of very unstable form when the scientists and thinkers began to cultivate with great precision and power understandings of the principles of the laws of physics and biology and neurobiology and then neuropsychology and so forth, as to enhance the probability of there existing a psychotronics techno-tyranny, a psychotronically augmented techno-tyranny, involving all the other previous and more primitive forms of rackets into a weaponized cultural racket, which fed back into itself in order to maintain its own control as the primary meaning of national security. This is what people are calling the deep state. But this Dr. Goldfinger might have set up his own faction. So somewhere between Nimrod and Dr. Goldfinger are the archons, basically. And it seems that our Dr. Goldfinger type has come up with weapon systems that have perhaps gave him the ability to break away from control from his former benefactor and ruler. That is possibly something that has gone on. It's not to be ruled out. It doesn't really add much nobility to those beings, especially as they continue using the same methods that make them despicable just as their former bosses. But I'm not going to rule that out. All this has a metaphysical basis in that the Demiurgos is the author of the intentions that the archons receive and also act as their instinctive and technologically enhanced instructions for what to do. It's an architectural blueprint that's established, and the cult of Nimrod controls it, basically. And the demiurgic Pontifex Maximus of that group is whoever is the king of the archons, basically. They manifest archetypal power enhanced by their ability to distort the reality of how people interact in a world through covert control on one side of its various structures of authority and material power, and by, for example, creating knowledge asymmetries that reinforce that concerning social networking or fifth columnry using instant communications technology, currency rackets, and the fact that the internet is a weaponized platform of propaganda and surveillance against the public, all augmented by psychotronics, creating therefore reinforced control of the culture as if it were itself a weapon system. Hell, I mean, isn't that sufficient evidence of a racket? And yet this cult of Nimrod, therefore using the cult of personality, the cult of the cult of charisma, they fit right into the weaponized cultural rackets paradigm, augmented by what are disguised weapon systems. In other words, smart cities, for example, anything smarter than it needs to be. They develop a system of conspirators and accessories to the crimes of creating basically pseudo-worlds full of dupes. And they are the cause of this effect, the spirit of this expression, and the conception of this event. That is, the architecture of the false cosmos and its evil cult. And this contains a functional hierarchy of what I call Fifthery. So it's kind of a filthy sin as well as a crime. Oh well. Ooh, you're gonna get a baby fifth touch. You're gonna get the fifth touch, fifth columns right now. You tried to stop it twice before. You're not gonna stop it this time. Fifth manure, fifth trash, fifth filth, all piled up together, comprise most of society at this point. Except for the pure dupes, who, man, I guess there's a huge army of them too. But concerning the fifth columns, the conductors of Fifthery, who get this fifth touch, for me, it's interesting to say that the bottom of the barrel polished knavery seems indistinct from the top of the top shelf fifth bummery. I mean, the best fifth bum you can find pretty much overlaps with and is interchangeable with any polished knave in the fifth column who may be bottom of their barrel. So there's this constant suture and back and forth and overlapping between two basic types of what I call charlatans. Charlatans are a bunch of polished knaves and fifth column bums, basically. And they can all have day jobs, too. It's the art of knavery, basically. And their types come in the forms of basically fools, who the more talented of which and the more earnest of which can become turnkeys or lackeys. And those, in turn, are headed up by henchmen, who are more directly accessories to actual racketeering. The rest are basically dupes, and they're just kind of pushed around. They're called turnkeys and lackeys. But it's the henchmen who have the privilege of doing this the most, and they despise freelancers. That's why organized crime often gets treated so harshly. How it ends up working is that this is the lower level of fifth agency. And it involves getting things done as the charlatans would do, which is by making fools of themselves in various ways while serving certain roles functionally, and just thereby causing organized crime to run smoothly. The upper level of management, the conspirators and actors of these rackets, are those chicanery, those guilty of chicanery, the art of evil scheming. And their way of going about things is to send their handlers out to go collect their henchmen and get them to act the way that they want them to, handle them. That's why they're called handlers. They often are horrors of persons who formerly had some virtue or talent or held assets in the world, but decided to sell them out to the demiurge. And they become the efficient cause of decisions made by the henchmen, who in turn manage the turnkeys and lackeys, basically run a world of fools into the ground for their own benefit. These handlers answer to managers and bosses above them, overt and covert, that lead inevitably to an overboss who ends up following what he's told to do by an archon, along with many other such overbosses. They're the formal cause because of the planning and the decision-making that they make, which causes the handlers, the efficient cause, the proximal cause to the actual racketeering, to handle their henchmen all the way down the line. And that's how they're organized. So with that understood, you have an understanding of how the fifth column is structured, much like any other organization or group, with bosses and sub-bosses and, lackeys, turnkeys, and, the doofus that has to, answer all your silly questions. Or pick up your drinks when you're gone. I'm not saying all people do that are doofuses, but there are a lot of doofuses in those fields, I've noticed. I'm not saying everyone is. I used to work in those areas in some capacity. So it's just that whenever you really are genuine doofus, you're probably not going to move up, even in a fifth column world, that much. So it turns out that fifth column can be conducted on that level, just like operations for any business or any other concern can. It's just a hierarchical authority structure. And once you know it's structured that way, you can see easily how it can overlap through instant communications, covert internet topologies, falsely patriotic Stasi state policies that can be weaponized at anyone they choose, complete dossiers on people and databases of their minds based on that information, which can then be input into a fusion center collection systems from their various sources, however they gather them about you electronically or by any other means, human intelligence. It's just constantly fed in through the internet, which, as I said, is a surveillance weapon against the public. So, the levels of control that you're able to get, which can go side by side in the visible and the invisible form simultaneously and accomplish a racket, can be used now to more coherently explain why these rackets still exist, though it is absurd that they should exist, that people can't just think themselves out of this situation where they submit to this crap. Well, it says something about human nature too, doesn't it? It's not just that these were inflicted on them. They bought into it, they sold into it, they accepted it, they became its dupes. And that's a nice primer of what is the templative structure of fifth columnary in relation to what society should properly be, and then how it's misconstrued by their influence and the methods by which that is done. And so the overall situation with regard to how covert internet topologies play a role in that. And now I'll discuss in the next series of videos how psychotronics weapon systems are geared to assist in this process in a way that is very pragmatic, and that's where the rubber hits the road, as an actual social action.